Good afternoon and welcome to the Lunchtime Series with me, Kevin Britz, leading the charge with insights, information, and ultimately effective results. If you haven't yet, please like and share on your favorite platform and to keep our channel growing. Joining in today's leadership segment, we have author, coach, and the creator of Infinite Leadership Framework, known for her transformative work in executive coaching, team dynamics, and self-leadership. Kylee returns with insights from her latest adventure, launching That Impact book in New York, and experiences firsthand the energy and the reset that comes from a bold shift in an environment. From walking the fast-paced streets of Manhattan to redefining what it means to lead with authenticity. Please welcome back to the show, Kylee Leota. Kylee, how are you doing?
Kevin, I'm so excited to be here. Third time. I feel like that's a winning combination that we've got going on.
Absolutely. And it's a pleasure to have you. And I follow all of the stuff that you always post. And it's always exciting to see that you're putting it out there. Yeah, I mean, from our previous conversations, we had we delved into the Enneagram specifically and had
Yeah.
such wonderful unpacking of that. But Kylee, before we just head on over there to the
Yeah.
next conversation, just give us a bit of a recap for those who don't know you. Tell us about you and what you do.
Yeah, so I am a leadership, behavior, and diversity and inclusion expert with I want to say let's just go with 20 years plus, because otherwise I'm going to give away my age of doing this work in this particular space. And I'm particularly passionate about helping people get those behavioral shifts to get sustainable movement in their goals and outcomes. And that really comes with that self-leadership piece and really hacking your own brain, I guess, for lack of a better word. And we know that if we want to be the best leaders that we can be, in order to lead others, we have to lead ourselves. And in order to lead ourselves, we have to know ourselves. So helping people get that transformational experience, creating what success looks like for them. My business Elements for Success, it was named after Earl Nightingale's definition of success, that success is the progressive realization of a worthy goal or ideal. And the idea is there's lots of different elements that make that up for different people. So helping craft those elements, nurturing that and helping people work to their strengths and work in their zone of genius to get the best outcomes they can for themselves, because then that's going to lend into their teams and into their organizations.
I love it. Fantastic. So, I mean, having you back here is really exciting because you have a new book, right? So,
Yeah.
being able to speak about the book, tell us a little bit about why this new book and what are you aiming to sort of share with this new insight?
Yeah, so a couple of things. So I went to New York for the release of That Impact book, which was a collaborative series around a lot of entrepreneurs sharing their insights around what created impact for them. So that was really exciting. We did a book launch in Times Square. It was all fancy dress up and very lovely. And I have to say, a little bit in love with New York. So it was just a very transformational experience. But at the end of last year, so it's been a hot minute since we caught up, I released my own book called Infinite Leadership, and that's about driving continuous improvement and creating excellence for everyone. And this comes through a whole heap of stuff, but my own transformational experience, but also just taking, one of the things that I think we forget is that we can't say that we don't know anything anymore, because there is so much information out there. But how do we discern what is the right information for us at the right time in our particular journey? And when I kind of really sat back and looked at my own journey, others that I had led, others that I had coached, and looked at the research, for me, it came down to these 8 pillars, which is the infinite part of these pillars. And each letter comes with its own particular pillar. So it always starts with self, with identity. And then we move into nurturing, which is emotional agility, fearlessness, which is not from the absence of fear, but how to move through fear, innovation, nobility, influence, which includes what we've talked about before, which is psychological safety and really strong communication skills. Then we've got transformation and ecosystem. And that ecosystem is really pivotal, because we always start with self, but then we've got to go over to this ecosystem with who we surround ourselves, whether that be as an individual on our journey, whether we're in a team, and whether we're in an organization, is getting that ecosystem right. And Jim Collins says it's about getting the right people in the right positions on the right bus to get that trajectory moving forward.
I love and I love that you've broken it down to the 8 pillars. But one of the things that you mention is you talk about changing our environments can change our mindset. Why is
Yeah.
it so powerful, especially for leaders? Because tell us, what is your stance on that?
Yeah, so I think the thing about, it's really difficult because we are often pushing ourselves and just going through the motions and going through the motions and going through the motions. But I don't know about you, but have you ever gone, I went to New York. That was pretty transformational. Not everyone needs to do something so drastic. You can create a shift by, I'm working at my home office. I could go work in a coffee shop. I could just move from my room here to my deck. I could go work in a workspace. You could work in a library. You could go shift energy. Because what happens is when we shift our energy, it creates that space to shift our ideas and shift our thinking. And sometimes we get stuck in going through the motions. We get stuck in when we walk into our environment, our brain goes, I know what we do here. And we sit and do the same thing over and over and over again, even though our brain doesn't necessarily consciously recognize that that's a pattern that we have. So our brains are wired for looking for pattern recognition. And so we go in, we go, oh, okay, I'm in my office now. This is what I do. And we don't necessarily consciously realize some of those things that we get stuck on. And sometimes by creating that shift in our environment, we can create a shift in our state. And that can create, I don't know about you, but have you ever gone, I love the water. I'm so in love with the ocean. And I know that if I'm feeling really heavy and I'm feeling really blocked, if I just go sit by the ocean, invariably my state shifts. I calm myself down in the ocean, and all of a sudden I'll be like, oh, that was the solution to my problem all along because I've created space for myself in the way that I'm thinking.
And when you speak to it like that, very often we think of changing our energies or changing our perspectives as something, like you say, going to New York, that's quite a big thing. But, it doesn't have to be that drastic. It can be quite gradual. It could be a small shift that you make. It's what we tend to, and it's, as humans, we like the comfort. So we tend to do what we know. And it's really understanding that potentially you need to break the pattern. You've got to interrupt the pattern.
Yeah, that causing that disruption. And I think, I had a client a couple of years back now, and she was feeling like quite a failure. And she said to me, Kylie, I've allocated my admin days as these days on a Monday. And then I'm, working really late. I'm working on weekends. I'm taking work home with me all the time. And then when we unpacked what she did on her so-called admin day, out of the 9 hours she had allocated to admin, she did about 45 minutes because it was constantly being disrupted. But she had this mindset that that was her admin day. She wasn't doing the admin. And so she was creating the sense of failure. So we unpacked that. We shifted her admin to a different day that wasn't disrupted by being on a Monday and doing all this kind of stuff. And within 2 months, she was no longer taking work home. She was completing all her work. She was getting 9 hours of admin on an admin day. And so she was feeling far more effective. And all the shift what we did was change the day that she had allocated to admin. But she had continued on that same pattern and had gotten herself in quite the rut, and she had felt really bad, and she was feeling really awful about her own productivity and her own performance. And she's started to question herself as a leader. But when we step back out of it, the shift that we changed was changing the day. And there's a quote that says, ordinary things done consistently create extraordinary. And so I always encourage my clients to look at the ordinary micro moments that they can capture that become this cumulative snowball effect. So, for example, I like to have time in the morning before I start work to sit, journal, have a coffee, clear my head for the day, think about what I'm going to do. Some people like to get straight into work. There's lots of different, I don't think there's necessarily a right or a wrong response. It's about what's right for you and then working to that and, accelerating that. It's not necessarily, I'm a morning person, so I love a good morning story about get up in the morning and do that. But there are people that are not. So get yourself ready the night before so that you're ready to go when you get up in the morning. It's about what works for you.
So as you speak through it, I think the word for me comes up that stands out above it about that process is being more intentional. And I think very often people don't, because we are get caught up in our patterned kind of operating systems. We're not as intentional, right? Until we are, and then something shifts. I was talking to someone this morning as well around shifting in perspective. And because of an old limiting belief and being stuck in that usual pattern, it was almost like this person didn't believe that they had choice, purely
Oh my
based on the
goodness.
fact that they stuck in the same pattern. And I was like, have you considered that you actually have a choice? And it's like
Yeah.
being intentional, right?
We give away our power all the time by saying we don't have a choice because something happened. And I call it unconscious existing versus conscious choosing. So we have this unconscious existing. We're just going through the motions over and over again. And I challenge that choice thing all the time. When people say to me, I didn't have a choice. And I'm like, Well, you may not have liked the choices that you had, but you still had a choice, right? So sometimes it's about choosing the less crappy of the crappy options. Sometimes it's not all rainbows and unicorns, but we give away our power all of the time. And the really good example of that is how often, I think everybody can relate to the story. Have you ever sent a reactive text message to somebody back and then said, oh, he made me or she made me angry and she made me do this? And I'm like, have you ever caught yourself mid-text going, actually, I'm giving away my power right now by being reactive to what they've said. I've got a choice in this. I can choose to walk in alignment with my values and go, if I choose to be kind and compassionate and lead with integrity, is this message any of those that I'm about to send? No. Well, I can choose to do that, differently. And Gabby Bernstein talks about the choose again method. If you don't like something, you pause, you look at your options, and you choose again. You make a different pathway.
Yeah. And it sounds quite simple, but it is a simple kind of process, but very often it's not an easy one because
For sure.
because we get so stuck in it, we don't see that it's actually that simple. Like you have the ability to choose again, just make a different decision, right? So,
Yeah.
Kylee, so let's talk about the infinite leadership insight. So, what are the core principles? Like you have touched some of your principles or your 8 pillars here, at least.
Yep.
Don't you want to just expand a little bit on that, because you've got such significant ones that tap into some very significant parts of great leadership, in my opinion,
Yeah.
like agility, fearlessness, even your ecosystem. Don't you want to unpack those a little bit further for the audience listening?
Absolutely. And I think really underlying the premise of the book is about having a really strong reflective practice. And I don't know about you, but most of us went to high school, and everyone said you should study. But how many people were explicitly taught how to study? And it's a bit the same with reflective practices. We talk about having a good reflective practice. We talk about that, but we don't actually teach people how to have a reflective practice. So I talked about in the book, I talk about reflect, review, and recalibrate. So reflect on where I am right now, reflect on what my thoughts are, my current situation, where it is at a baseline, review, am I happy with where things are at, or does something need to change? And if I am happy with something, how can I do more of that? Right? Because we often go, I'm happy with things are, and then we just leave it at that. But we can still elevate that. Right. If I had a really good conversation with somebody, like I've had a conversation with you today, Kevin, and I really get energized by spending time with certain people. How can I do more of that? How can I make conscious choosing throughout my week to spend time with people that make me feel good by the energy exchange that we have? And how do I consciously choose not to spend time with people that drain my energy and, do that kind of thing? And then the other part is if something's not going well, what do I need to change, reduce, eliminate, or change, right? And it's so funny. When I do this activity, I literally get a piece of paper, draw it in half, what's working well on one side, what's not working well on the other side. And everybody wants to go to the what's not working well column. That column is always gigantic. And when I ask people to sit with what's working well, I remember having this lady and she said she had one thing on that side. I said, I haven't seen you in a month. Are you telling me in 30 days, there has only been one positive thing that has happened in your life? But all she wanted to do was get over to the negative side. And I'm like, no, we're going to sit over here for a minute. And you're going to really consciously choose some positive things that have happened in your life. And our brains are wired for negativity bias, right? So we know our natural disposition is, oh, but this is bad. These things are happening. So a conscious practice is to sit with what's actually going well in my life right now. So that's kind of like the underlying principle of all of it. For me, I think each pillar I think has its own value in a whole variety of different ways. But I always tell people, the book is designed that you can open a pillar and just read that one. But really, I always encourage people to start with identity, because if we don't have our identity right, that's going to define our emotional intelligence. It's going to define how we make decisions, because we're not understanding our values. We're not understanding what leads us into walking in our health, in Enneagram language and unhealth. So we are then hijacked by our emotions. we are subjected to fear, we are unable to be innovative, and the ego gets in the way, which is the nobility piece that impacts our influence, transformation, ecosystem. So the identity is kind of, for me, this really big foundational piece. And I know for many years of my career, there's been times where I've been a phenomenal leader, times I haven't been a phenomenal leader. I think we can all relate to that at times. And I think it's because I really didn't spend, and nobody taught me how to sit with that piece around my identity. And I think for a long time, my identity was wrapped up in those unconscious thought patterns versus those conscious choices that I be aware of. And so that identity piece, and in that we talk about different profiling tools. You and I are passionate Enneagram lovers. So, that's always my go-to, but everything's got value because it helps us create common language. And we also unpack our values, because I think so often we get caught of walking in alignment or out of alignment with our values. And that dictates a lot of our behavior, again, unconsciously. So how do we do that piece? And I really encourage people to sit with that and don't gloss over and don't rush over that piece. And then there's South African entrepreneur Vusi Thembekweyo says that identity is man-made, so thereby it can be man-changed. So if you do this work on your identity and you're sitting there with a bit of the ick because you're not really liking that part of yourself, then it's about consciously choosing what you would like that to look like, and what are the actions, behaviors, thoughts, and feelings that are aligned with that to move yourself more into an identity that you think is aligned with a truer version of yourself. So that's the part around identity that I always encourage people to start with. The nobility part, we talk a lot about emotional intelligence, and I don't know if I've told you my joke on this before, but in psychology, DBT stands for dialectical behavior therapy. And really it's about helping people identify their emotions and how to engage with them. I call my DBT is diagnosis by TikTok, because all the time, how many
Yes.
times have you, I don't know about you, but clients message me all the time and going, oh my God. And they'll send me a TikTok and go, I'm this, I'm this, I'm this. And I'm like, let's just take a step back. Let's just take a step back and let's be aware of what's on TikTok. And look, there's lots of information that's out there that's good quality information. But sometimes TikTok has made people very aware to their self-awareness part of identifying that they have emotions and being able to label, in some cases, accurately their emotions. But it's kind of got this, it's kind of, for some people, miss the mark around, well, I'm allowed to feel my feels. And I'm like, well, true, but also contextually appropriate feels in context. And so, it's one thing to be self-aware. Self-management is a whole other ballgame. And I think there's a disconnect on taking that theory people are learning and implementing it contextually in their personal relationships, in their professional relationships. And the other part of it is too, notice your feelings, but there are always going to be time that you're going to be hijacked by your emotions, and you need to have that agility to pivot from what you're feeling to get to the next best thing and recalibrate yourself and ground yourself to be able to show up as the version of yourself that you want to be. I think that's something, DBT has become my new little thing, because I think all the time and I think the risk is misinformation in some of those platforms, that is a bit of a risk. Fearlessness is sorry, you were going to say?
I was just going to say, I think what's notable about what you mentioned there is it's contextual and understanding that in the context too. And very often we don't realize that we experience a certain type of emotion based on a certain type of day or a certain type of moment or a certain type of experience. So, it's great to recognize the emotion, but in context to what is that, and do you have that awareness to that degree that it's being impacted or influenced by something? And having that awareness. Some days, and I often share this with clients, is when you're having a really bad day, um, maybe just don't make decisions. Just have the bad day.
Yes.
So because very often,
Sip.
in the identity, they have to make this decision based on whatever the context of that moment is, but it could lead you to the worst type of decision. So just allow yourself to have the bad day, right?
And I guess, I'm sure you have the same experience with coaching as well. Sometimes themes sort of pop up across coaching clients that have no correlation to each other. And then all of a sudden you're having the same conversation multiple times in a week and you're like, what just happened there? But my, I guess, theme for the last couple of weeks is we are so busy pushing through and moving through because life is so busy and life is hectic and all of the things that we don't allow ourselves to sit with it. Because we're too busy trying not to feel our feels, or we're trying to busy. I don't have time for that. I don't have time to deal with this. I don't have time to deal with that. And so as a result of not dealing with it in a really inopportune moment, all the feels kind of overflow, and you don't necessarily, I had a client who, as an offhanded comment as she was walking out my door, said, and my dad's been diagnosed with cancer. And I'm like, I'm sorry, what? And I said, and when are you going to take time to process that? And she goes, oh, I'm too busy at the moment. I've scheduled some time in a couple of weeks. And I'm like, so be mindful that if you don't attend to your feelings, they tend to hijack you at the least opportune moments. And less than 24 hours later, she was on the floor of her office with her back to the door so nobody could walk in her office, calling me on the phone going, you know how you said that thing? Well, it's happened. And so, I think there's a flip side that says, don't be emotional, don't be this, don't be that. And so we try to move to our head to logicize things and move through it really quickly. But sometimes, it's not about sitting and bathing in your emotions and wallowing like having a bath, but it is around noticing and sitting and acknowledging our feelings and allowing ourselves to feel our feelings. Because, I'm not going to I generalize, but we know that that's not been normalized for men to do. We certainly know it's not been normalized in leadership. I have had many a situation where I was told to leave my personal life at the gate and go into this zone and not allow myself to feel my feelings. I remember walking in, I got a promotion. I walked in my first day on my new job and my son was sick and feeling very torn about being able to go pick him up from school because he was so sick he needed to be picked up. And it was my first day, and the expectations of being in this leadership job, I was really rumbling with my feelings because I didn't want my boss to think less of me. But I'm a
Yeah.
mum, like this thing happened. So, I had all sorts of feelings going on that particular day. And I think we have to normalize that it's normal to have feelings and it's okay to have feelings. But we just can't wallow in it, but equally we have to acknowledge it. The third pillar is fearlessness. And I guess one of my own learnings has been that we don't like to sit with fear either. Like fear is probably one of the emotions that is really difficult for people. We want to move away from it. We don't want to deal with it. We don't want to address it. So we avoid, we find other ways of workarounds. But, there's the Native American buffalo. There's a story about the Native American buffalo, and it's the only animal that when a storm is approaching, it actually runs towards the storm. Not because it loves the storm, but because it knows it'll get to the other side faster. And I think it's like that with fear. What happens is the other animals run away from the storm and they can't outrun it, and the storm eventually catches up to it, and then they're stuck in it. And I just think if we take on this perspective, like the Native American buffaloes, and we identify our fears and we run towards it, yes, it's going to be confrontational. Yes, we're going to be feeling, the result of that, but we are going to move through it way faster than trying to run away from it. And so noticing those fears. And I think, what you said earlier about what's going on behind our emotions is, one of the lessons I learned very on in my university in my very early career was behavior is communicative, right? So all of our behavior, whether we engage, whether we withdraw, it is communicative. It's a method of communicating. So what is the actual fear? And are we paying attention to the correct fear, or are we kind of creating an idea of what it is, but not really getting to the core function of what's going on for us? Because if you don't get the function right, all the strategies in the world won't work, and then you'll feel resentful about all of those things. So we've got to really check. And one of the ways I tell people is if we've got it right, is if the strategies that we've designed to match what we think it is work, then we're probably on the right track. If you're implementing all these strategies and getting strategy fatigue from trying all these things and nothing's working, then we probably haven't addressed the root cause of the problem or the fear that's going on. And we need to go back to the drawing board. I think innovation is something that we talk about a lot as leaders, but how burnt out are we as a society at the moment, and how hard is innovation to come by, and how much pressure are we feeling? So one of the things that I talk a lot about is understanding how your brain works under stress and under calm, and how do you move yourself back to the calm as much as possible so that you create space for innovation. And I would think, I do this behavior scale that I work with people, and we talk about 4 stages. So we talk about being calm, regulated, low. We talk about moving up into the anxiety zone. We talk about moving into the dysregulated zone. And then we talk about that recovery space. And, the concept, I was running a training at the beginning of the year, maybe early. Yeah. And one of the things that I was doing with this particular group, and I saw this lady looking quite contemplative and probably a little bit down. So I went over and I said to her, because the activity was, tell me what it looks like, sounds like, and feels like when you are calm. Tell me what it looks like, sounds like, and feels like when you're moving into that anxiety zone, dysregulated and recovery. And she sat there and I said, oh, are you okay? And she said, I do not know what it looks like to feel calm. She goes, I wake up in the morning and I start in the anxiety zone. So if that's where we're starting, we've got a very small runway to get to dysregulated versus if we start in the calm zone. She goes, I don't know what I look like, sound like, and feel like. She said, I don't remember the last time I felt that way. And that's really concerning because we can't do our best work if we're constantly in this state of high anxiety all of the time and high stress and overwhelm and dysregulation. So we talk a lot about that in that innovative scale, is how to get your body, your brain back to a calmer state. What are the strategies? Because that's going to create space for innovation. And then we've got approaches to how we become innovative by asking some reflective questions around that. The next pillar is nobility, where we talk a lot about how our ego gets in the way. And I don't know anybody whose ego hasn't gotten in the way. I'm yet to meet one. We've all had that experience. I would like to say, and I'm sure you would too, Kevin, that, after all our experience as leaders and as all of our coaching, and we've learned all the stuff, that I never get hijacked by my ego, but it is just factually incorrect. Unfortunately, I think every single one of us get hijacked by it. But the thing is, it's about noticing it and pivoting back faster and having that awareness to go, there it is. There you go. Took over the driver's seat again and working back forward. Because when I've looked at organizations, teams, and individuals that are quite dysfunctional, ego's in the driver's seat every single time. So how do we move through that? And then we get into the influence, which you and I have another passion about, which is that psychological safety piece, because we need psychologically safe spaces to unpack our identity as a team and as an organization. We need psychologically safe spaces to be emotionally agile. We need psychologically safe spaces to move through fear, to be innovative, to move our ego out of the way. And then we look at highly effective communication, and we look at things like, how do we give effective feedback? If you're in a psychologically unsafe environment, the feedback is more than often going to feel hostile, even if it's positively intentioned. So sometimes, again, we focus too far ahead of the game, and we've got to go back to basics and get that psychological safety right. The transformation piece is about putting all this cumulative together, but also looking at, begin with the end in mind. Look at that legacy that we as individuals or as teams or organizations, what are we actually working towards? And, I was talking to someone one day and they said to me, I have absolutely no intention of leaving a legacy. And I kind of had to break the news to them that you kind of leave a legacy regardless of whether you intend to or not. So wouldn't it be great if we were leaving a conscious legacy versus an unconscious pathway of destruction through being that, again, not being aware of our limiting beliefs and not being aware of our unconscious existing and how we move through things. The ecosystem part for me, I think, has been really pivotal because it kind of tops and tails of moving from individual to that ecosystem. And I know in my own journey in the last couple of years that I've had a massive shift in my ecosystem, because what I've recognized is some people are happy to support you to the level of their comfort versus your own comfort. And as you start, particularly as you move into leadership, the people that come out of the woodwork, and we have a saying in Australia, which is tall poppy syndrome, which means that people need to be cut back down to size if they're getting too big for their boots. So who do you think you are to think you should have this position? Who do you think you are to lead this? Or who do you think you are? And so ecosystem can be really fragile, and you need to be careful who you let into your ecosystem, because like the nature's ecosystem, if you enter a species that's not for your ecosystem, it can be quite damaging and destructive, right? And I think that's been a huge part of my journey. And I think as a team and as an organization, for organizations that are certainly trying to break into a new market, who are the people in your ecosystem that are going to help you get there? all of these things that we take into consideration. And then I think the biggest part for me is understanding that our individual ecosystem is made up of a holistic piece. And that includes our personal life, it includes our family, it includes our friends. But it's like being the conductor of an orchestra. And we have this concept that, you know, things, unfortunately, when we are unconsciously existing, things take solo for a while. So, you might become a workaholic, or your family might need you and you may not work for a while, or all of these things. And it's okay for something to play solo for a little while. But like really bad guitar solos of the 80s, if something plays solo too long, it ruins the song, right? So, like every part of our life, it has to come back. And when we're playing a symphony, I just think of a beautiful symphony means that everything is playing in harmony. Because I'm not very good at balance. I'm terrible at it. I'm not very good at it at all, but I can get my head around the concept of harmony. And that means that everything's playing in harmony. That means that something's not playing too fast, too slow, too loud, too soft. And even if something does play solo for a little while, like a symphony or like any good music has that kind of thing, it just can't play too long, because otherwise it throws the harmony and the symphony out of whack. So it's got to come back into the fold to create the perfect symphony. And when that's playing solo, it doesn't mean everything else stops. Everything's playing in the background, right? So if you're working a lot, your family's still playing in the background, your personal development's still playing in the background. All these other areas of your life are still playing in the background. And if you don't attend to it, do you have, is everything running in harmony? So we're just bringing it back in so that we can construct our own ecosystem. And then we make sure that our outer ecosystem of who we surround ourselves is matched and really important.
Thank you for taking us through that, because it just gives us such a wonderful full overview of what it is you're sharing with us. And I think just going back to the nobility part, I think when you speak about ego, and I think people don't attach those two things. That doesn't necessarily fit in the same conversation. But what's interesting about that is that you also you speak to psychological safety, with how that can be impacted because of ego. And I think that's such a fascinating kind of frame that people don't tend to see, because, and like you say, we all go through these moments where our ego gets in the way of, and it's one of the reasons why, I mean, as much as I have the Lunchtime series, I won't hop on, I won't hop onto a TikTok live and just kind of sit there and speak to people. I just don't do it, because I'm very aware of my ego kind of taking over and going, oh, listen to me, I have all this advice. And you kind of going, because there is because I've seen some people do that. And for me, it's very inauthentic, and it comes across as, this person really needs to be seen for some reason, for whatever that reason. That's cool. Like, if they need that, that's fine. I just don't need it. So if I'm going to do this, what is the intention behind it? And why would I just sit there and speak randomly to the camera? So
Yeah.
I'm very aware of that. And it's interesting that you tie it into the nobility. That's the
Yeah. And look, nobility is about service as well. And when our ego is hijacking, we're often, looking at here and not looking out and how we can serve others. And I think the piece around psychological safety and ego for me is around that, one of the pieces I do in my workshops is really understanding, we understand that organizations have a responsibility to create psychologically safe environments. That is a fact. But we as individuals have a responsibility in this space as well. And not only are we responsible for helping create a sense of belonging, but we also need to identify what belonging looks like for us. And if we are not prepared to speak up and share about that, then I wonder how much our ego is getting in the way. And to go back to our Enneagram for a second, one of the things, I'm a 2 Enneagram, the helper. And where my ego gets in my way, and I'm reluctantly will admit this, but it's been part of my work, is that I want people to offer to support me in a way that I need to support, but I actually don't want to tell you what I need. I just want you to know it, because I innately often know what you need. And so when people don't offer to support me, or when people support me in a way that isn't in alignment, I notice my ego, because my resentment builds and I get really frustrated. And I'm like, oh, don't worry about it. I'll do it myself. It's fine. And then I have these conversations in my head as I'm saying that. I'm like, oh, there you go. There's that ego piece getting in the way again, because have I communicated what I need? Have I communicated what would be helpful for me? No, because I want people to be mind readers and figure that out for themselves without me having to say it. So that's how sometimes my ego gets in the way. And I'm sure, hopefully, many of your listeners can also resonate with that story. But it doesn't, we think of ego as this grand thing of people standing up and taking over meetings, which is in part, but our ego hijacks us in lots of micro ways as well. When you walk away from a meeting because the chair forgot to ask you what your input for the question is, and then you're cranky with them. That's your ego playing, oh, well, they didn't ask me. Well, did you speak up? Like, you know, no, but they should have asked me. That's ego. So we've got to ask for what we need. We need to create environments where it's okay to ask for it, but we also then have to do the work and actually communicate that themselves. And that's where that, I guess that influence piece around how do we influence and create good communication as well. So they all, and this is the part about infinite leadership, right? They all stand alone, but they're all really intertwined. And it's that infinite, the concept of the infinite symbol continue to rise, because you could do this work this year and you could go through all of the pillars. And next year, when you're a new version of yourself from doing the work, you can go through them again and be a different version of yourself and recalibrate your identity and recalibrate where you are in your nurturing and recalibrate where you are and continue to level up and level up and level up in your journey. And you can do that as an individual. You could sit and do this individually. You could do it as a team. What is our team identity? What is our fears as a team that we're not addressing? How is our ego as a team getting in the way of us doing the work with the other larger parts of the organization? What's our ego? But it can be organizational. So it's designed intentionally and purposefully to be layered. And to be able to be reflected and reviewed and recalibrated as often as you need to be able to get you to the next level in your journey.
Yeah. Kylee, so one of the things that I find quite fascinating, you mentioned that leadership is not about reinvention, but remembering who you are. What do you mean by that? And how can leaders begin that reconnection process?
Well, so I guess, when we go through this thing, we feel like we've got to reinvent ourselves over and over and over again. But when we remember who we are at our core, we innately know. And I think the problem is a lot of the time that we ignore our knowing about who we are to frame who we think we need to be in certain contexts, because we don't take the time to sit and reflect. And every Monday on LinkedIn, I do a series called Monday Musings, where I just really ask some really reflective questions, because how often do we take time out of our day, out of our week, to sit down with ourselves and check in with our knowing of who we are? How often do we sit down and actually go, what do I really feel about this particular thing, and how does that show up in my leadership? How does that show up as me as individually, personally, professionally? And check in with our knowing versus constantly feeling we have to reinvent the wheel of, of who we are all of the time.
So you use the word knowing, and I just want to touch on this, is very often, and this is, for me, it's such a weighted conversation. And because people kind of realize, when you say, well, when you sit with your knowing or you ignore the knowing, right? Very often when you frame it in that conversation or in that language, people will go, what knowing? What are you talking about? Like as if there's some kind of this wisdom or this intangible something that's supposed to dawn on you. And to me, I don't know where it's always come from, but from a young age, like I just had a knowing of stuff and information and something bigger than me that I kind of moved towards instinctively, and I've been shamed because of it. And I've been told that I'm too sensitive and I'm overthinking it. And why am I asking so many questions? And it's all in aim of now, at the beautiful age that I'm at, I kind of know that I know the knowing. And when I
Yes.
go in and you say, as you say, and you reflect back, what is an absolute knowing for you? How do you experience that knowing? Is it just a case of sitting with it and unpacking it?
I think, first of all, we don't trust our knowing very often. And I think for me, I can tell you 1,000 different examples where a year down the track, 5 years down the track, I knew something to not be right and I didn't trust my knowing. And then it's kind of, I don't know, it feels like this crazy sense of deja vu, like I'm I'm like, I've been here before. But for me, the knowing is, yeah, right. So at the ripe old age, we are, Kevin, of 21, is something that's been innate in us. It is really hard because it doesn't feel tangible. But I think for me, the knowing is this, like we talked about our feelings earlier, that's sitting with it. How often do we take time to sit with something and actually think about it? And I don't necessarily look, I have propensities to be an overthinker for sure. But I think in oftentimes what people are talking about as overthinking is the fact that we are consciously choosing to sit with it and think with it at all, rather than rush through it onto the next, onto the next, onto the next, onto the next, because that's how society often does things. So I've learned to accept, like you, I have been called too sensitive, to overthinking, all of these kind of things. And I guess I've realized that that decision making piece that you were talking about earlier is that I actually don't have to make the decision right now. There are very few instances where I need to take an instantaneous moment right now to make a decision. I actually can say, hey, I'll get back to you on that. Or I'd really like to consider my response to this. So I'm really attending to what you're really asking me. And the really good example of that is hallway conversations. And I've seen, myself included, many leaders get stuck in feeling like they have to have a response in the moment as someone's walking through the hallway, yelling a question at them, and they feel as leaders, they must provide a response straight away, rather than taking time to sit with their knowing and go, right, what do I know about this conversation? What do I know about this situation? And what is actually a considered response versus a reactive response? And so, again, I think that too often in society, we just, and I don't know about you, but I think people thought the world was chaotic during COVID and that it would slow down. And I think it's kind of like done this arrow thing and gone faster than, every year seems to be faster than the next, right? So I feel like we're going so fast paced. And I think with AI, we're even going even faster paced, that no one's actually taking the time. So I don't know if it's really overthinking, to be honest. I feel like taking time to think about it is what's considered overthinking these days. So, I just think that we just have to pause. As Viktor Frankl says, there's that period between stimulus and response, there's the pause, and we take time to think. And if we lean into that a lot, we will find our knowing more often than not. But it's a practice, like everything, like reflection, like all of the other things. It's a
Yeah,
practice,
absolutely.
and we don't consciously choose it very often because it's uncomfortable.
Speaking about practices, if we were to give some practical shifts for the listeners today, what are some of the sort of movements that you can create in your momentum to do physically, emotionally, strategically? What would you advise people to start with, and what would that look like for you?
So I think some really simple, low-hanging fruit ones that are not really hard to do is get a piece of paper, draw a line in the middle. On this side, say, what's worked well for me today, this week, this month, whatever it is. The second part of that is, how can I do more? Really recalibrate the thinking about what's positive to then taking action on what's positive. The second one is, what's not working well for me today, this week, this month. What can I change, reduce, or eliminate? And then if you have to sit with the thing that you cannot change, like if there's a situation, say you hate your job, for example, and you're not in a position to be able to change it at this particular moment, then look at how you can create energy bookends before and after to create some space for you to transition, so that you've got space outside of work to be able to consider what your other options are. But often, again, going back to the fact that we have more choices than we realize, is I can't change this thing, but what can I change here? Like, can I change this thing, and create those little shifts along the way? So I think that's one thing. I think the second one is that shifting the environment, which, as we talked about at the very beginning, it is amazing what space you create purely by working in a different space, by moving this meeting. I know when I do audits around people's time, I'm a really, like I said earlier, I'm a morning person. I do my best work in the morning. I am currently, it's nearly 9 o'clock here in Australia as we're having this call. I know that I don't tend to operate at my highest performance at this time of the evening. So I don't book calls with clients at this time of the evening. I do my stuff in the morning because that's my best operational time. And, Alex Hormozy has no meetings until midday. He does his deep flow work at that time. I tend to do some of my intensive stuff that's high intensive quite early in the mornings to get it out of the way so that I can create space. But figure out what works for you. Another really good activity that I think is low hanging fruit is energy giving and energy draining. What conversations, situation, people, and places give me energy? What situations, conversations, people, and places drain my energy? And do an audit for a whole week. Sit down and go, okay, I spoke to Bob today. That was really energy draining. Now, was it energy draining because Bob's energy draining, or was it energy draining because we were talking strategic plans and that's not my zone of genius? So I felt quite fatigued by that. Actually taking time, again, conscious choosing, be consciously aware of what actually going on for you and reflecting after each of those things. And then just doing a bit of an audit, because if you spend 80% of your day or 80% of your week in energy draining situations, conversations, people, and places, no wonder you're burnt out. So what can we shift? And again, control your controllables. You can't change everything, but there are certainly things that we give away our power on that is in our power to change, right? If you don't like feeling lethargic, look at your diet. If you don't like feeling, fatigued, have you been exercising? What do those things look like for you?
Yeah. What I enjoy about conversations like these, they're not things they're not approaches to leadership that sound idealistic. They're very, very practical. But, you can start with things like this, even with unpacking the 8 pillars, the agility, the identity. And I mean, just touching on the identity, and you mentioned Buzi Tembukwaya, which in South Africa is really well known. And,
yes,
just it's little practical things that you can actually really do on a regular. And like you say, it doesn't have to be a big thing that you do. It could be quite a small, micro, consistent behavior you take on your own leadership. And because you do that, things shift in ways that you won't anticipate, right?
sure. And, I was working with a executive director 18 months ago, and he was really struggling. He had a lot going on in his home life, and he was coming into work and he really wasn't showing up as his best self at work. And he had a really high intensity job. He loved his job, but he felt paradoxical between who he was at home and struggling. And the change was we implemented a half an hour buffer in the morning where there was no meetings booked to allow him to get into his work environment, decompress, recalibrate, and then have his meetings from there. Because when he was going from what was going on here, that was kind of out of his control due to his circumstances, into work and then going straight into a meeting, he was often dysregulated and not showing up as his best self. And that was causing some problems. So quite literally what we did was we put a half an hour buffer in it that allowed him to get into the office, sit down, go through his plan for the day, ground himself so that he could transition and show up to the best. And then no meetings 15 minutes before the end of the day, so he could ground himself ready for what he needed to do when he got home.
Yeah.
I know it sounds so simple. Like everyone's sitting there going, "Oh my God, that's so easy." Yeah. It's not rocket science. Yeah, it's quite literally not rocket science, but we overcomplicate a lot of the things, right? So sometimes we just have to go back to the basics first. And, look, that won't be the case for 100% of the time. But I don't know about you. I would say a good 90% of the time, if we go back to basics, we get shifts moving because we spend a lot of time trying to create really overcomplicated solutions for often very simplistic problems.
Yeah, absolutely. She's an author, a coach, and the creator of the Infinite Leadership Framework. Guys, Kylee, where can we get a hold of you? Because just share with us that information, and where can we get the books and all the programs, and tell us where to go.
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn, Kylee, thanks, Mum, Leota, Leota. Yeah, and on Instagram and Facebook, you'll find me under Elements Number 4 Success. You can reach out to me at my website, elementsforsuccess.com.au, and the Infinite Leadership book is available on Amazon.
Fantastic. Kylee, thank you. I see we've already been busy for almost an hour, and I'm like, every time you hear it just feels like I'm, it's an
But I said,
easy.
well, it's an energy giving conversation, right? With energy giving people.
Absolutely. I love it.
So that's why. That's how you know you're in flow when 1 hour feels like 5 minutes. So, let's take a leaf out of our book, spend time around people that give you energy.
Exactly. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. The links and descriptions will be in the description boxes below. That's elementsforsuccess.com.au. And Kylee Leota, thank you for your time. Thank you for being here. And we will chat to you soon.
Always, Kevin. Thank you so much, everyone.
Cheers for now.